as ministers and members of the Knesset, the president of the Ruderman Family Foundation, Jay Ruderman, and executive director Shira Ruderman, chief science officer and co-founder of the NCRI Research Institute, Joel Finkelstein, and CEO Adam Son, CEO of Taglit Birthright Israel, Gidi Mark, director of ADL in Israel, Carol Nuriel, executive director of Hillel Israel, Noga Brenner Samia, members and directors of all the organizations here today with us, dear guests. It is a distinct honor to attend and open the inaugural meeting of the Israel-American Jewry Caucus. To the members of the Knesset who lead this caucus, thank you for giving American Jews the esteem and focus they deserve from Israeli policymakers. Gratitude is also due to the Ruderman Family Foundation for years of partnerships in vital endeavors like these efforts in which I had the privilege to participate. The Knesset is a great meeting ground for Israel and American Jews, hosting regular groups and missions, including a historic bipartisan delegation of US leaders and lawmakers, many of which American Jews, led by Speaker of the US House of Representatives and my dear friend Kevin McCarthy this past May. Speaker McCarthy said then, "America is a better nation because of Israel. Israel, in turn, is a better nation because of America and because of our closeness with American Jews." Drawing strength from one another, Israel and the American Jewish community have achieved a degree of security and success unparalleled in Jewish history. But perhaps because we are flourishing, dangers appear on a scale unseen in a generation. For American Jews, the threat is twofold. Attacks on Israel in the political arena are bleeding into harassment on campus and attacks in the street. At the same time, those infected by extremist ideologies fill neighborhoods with hateful flyers and harass Jews at synagogues. Often anti-Semitism uses Israel to deflect accusations of bias, making their ancient hatred in a modern label, anti-Zionism. But the cover wears thin. Those who accuse Israel of apartheid and ethnic cleansing will blame Jews for outsized influence and dual loyalties. The defamatory charges are cut from the same cloth. A hatred of Jews so intense it disfigures reality. And as anti-Semites bridge political differences to unite against us, we need to do just that. Together, we can turn the rising tides of hate. This caucus will nurture the ties binding American Jews and Israel, providing a high-level platform to ensure the continued unity and success of the world's two greatest allies. Thank you all for being here with us today and for taking part in these long-time efforts. Thank you very much.
Mr. Jay Ruderman.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Speaker of the Knesset for opening today's event, and I want to thank the chairs of this caucus. I want to take a moment to thank our staff who are here, Galia, Liat, Itai, Yehuda, and Shachar, and to say that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is felt clearly in the United States. As someone who is living there now, our foundation, the Ruderman Family Foundation, was one of the key figures that was mapped by the BDS movement in Boston that sought to map key Jewish families and organizations just because we're Jews and just because we have connections to Israel. Anti-Semitism is real. It's felt every day. It's growing. And I'm proud that the Knesset is taking this up and paying attention to it because I think it's a key factor in Jewish American life right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. יושב ראש הכנסת עכשיו יצטרך בשל עיסוקיו הרבים. תודה רבה, אדוני.
Thank you.
שירה, את רוצה להציג את ג'ואל?
So good morning, and I'll just say thank you again. I do want to point out that this caucus, not like in the past, have 4 co-chairs, which shows how important the issue is and how it's across all parties, which is not something we take light and for granted. So that statement for itself, we have tremendous respect for it. I do want to represent our important part of the conversation, the researcher and the research that will be presented here by Dr. Joel Finkelstein and Adam Son, the director of NCRI, which I do want to bring here and to say it's not a regular research. The method is complicated. Every word is, beyond sensitivity. We took months just to analyze internally the ability to put the information in front of you here in ways that no one can challenge us for the wrong reasons. So I'm looking forward to hear, Joel, your presentation and your finding, and to have an opportunity after that to have the members of Knesset and the guests asking questions. So thank you.
Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. We're honored to be here on behalf of the NCRI, a U.S.-based organization. I thought maybe just to set a little bit of a stage of who we are. My name is Adam Son. I'm the CEO of the Network Contagion Research Institute. We developed methodologies, we have technology, and we have research that we've developed over the last 5 years that identifies and forecasts cyber-social threats. And we've done this in a variety of different areas. We've looked at this in the public health sector. So we've worked with organizations like Google and Walmart to identify issues impacting the success or failure of vaccine distribution at the height of COVID and the introduction of the vaccine. We work with the U.S. Attorney's Office on issues regarding manipulation of the capital markets and issues related to cryptocurrencies, and actually now just people's ordinary 401k. It's gotten much worse instead of better, and the regulators in the United States, FTC, SEC, and others are far behind. And then other issues in terms of vulnerable communities, which is how we came to know the Ruderman Foundation. The NCRI just completed the largest study of its kind in the world, working with the UK government Office of Communications on self-harm and suicide in children. So with that, we've attracted a lot of attention from the law enforcement and the intelligence community, lawmakers in the United States, people that have now reached out to join our board, who will be joining our board. General John Allen, 4-star general of the United States Marines, who led the United States military operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Also, Jean Tysinger, first female, actually, chief information officer of the CIA, is also joining the NCRI board. So we're really honored that the work that Joel has envisioned 5 years ago is not only now bearing fruit and having real impact in the world, but it's being recognized by people that have a lot more power and influence than the NCRI and can help us be a stronger organization together. So with that, I'd like to introduce my business partner and colleague and friend, Joel.
Okay. Thank you all for being here today.
שר התפוצות עמיחי שיקלי הצטרף אלינו. תודה רבה, אדוני השר. Go ahead, Dr. Joel.
My name is Dr. Joel Finkelstein. By training, I'm a neuroscientist. My training was in understanding how the brain learns by putting animals into virtual reality and controlling their minds with laser beams to reverse engineer how consciousness works in the brain. It turns out that this very intense form of manipulation in a virtual environment looks a lot like what happens on social media and the mathematics of this scale. So it's possible to understand, if we think of these social media platforms as brains, how they're actually predicting real-world problems, and they are predicting real-world problems. The challenge that I think we have is that the amount of information disorder that's growing on social media platforms has become a force that democracies are unable to handle. The people who get on those platforms are unable to handle themselves, and the platforms appear unable to handle what's happening on them. It's not really anyone's fault that this is true. The amount of disorder in the information, when people see these violent memes, when they encounter something so complex that they don't know how to manage themselves or their lives. What happens in the human brain is that we seek closure. We need an explanation for the chaos that's happening to us. And so instead of trying to understand the problems for what they really are, what everyone here will do, we will all do this, is instead of trying to solve a really complex problem, we look for someone to blame. Okay, that closure is an old problem. It's not a new problem. We opened this conversation talking about some language from the Torah. And the earliest inscription that we have on what anti-Semitism is a need for closure in a complicated world. Pharaoh tells his people, hey, these Jews are multiplying, and it sure looks like they're going to replace us. And by the way, they're going to be teaming up with invading nations to take us over. So that myth, this idea that Jews are replacing people, in the modern world, that has two twins. It has two versions. One of those versions is something that people in America are very familiar with. It's called the Great Replacement. And in this idea, you have the notion that there are Jews who are being brought in as immigrants to replace white people with people of color. Now, that idea is then mutated and twisted in Israel, where now Israel is an apartheid state. And it's replacing people of color with white people. These are the same myths. We don't have two problems with anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. We have one problem. It's a singular myth about people facing complexities they can't manage, needing somebody to blame, and because of the history of anti-Semitism, having a very clear person or organization or community or nation to do that with. So, with no further ado, I want to show you what our data has shown about this. Now, I thought that because these were so similar, that we would perform scaled analysis on this subject, and what we would see was that these two things must go up and down together. That's what I assumed going into the research. That does not appear to be the case. My clicker's not working.
מי יכול לעזור עם המצגת? אצל מי המצגת? Okay, so we will help you.
That's great. Okay, so, here we go, great, good. So in order to understand how these two things, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, are related, the NCRI, with the Ruderman Foundation, performed the largest study to our knowledge, with grabbing over 100 million comments to understand how these two things might be related to each other. Going back over 2.5 years on Twitter with over 100 million comments, we note that these things don't, in fact, surge together and sync together in spite of the fact they're so similar. They exist in what we refer to as a polarization pendulum. When one is ascendant, the other actually descends. The other does not have a lot of power behind it. When they are ascendant, when the Great Replacement idea, the New World Order, the globalists are ascendant, this predicts attacks against vulnerable communities. It predicts attacks against Jews and anti-Semitic attacks. But that doesn't happen when the chatter goes down. When the apartheid language goes up, when that myth rises, it also predicts anti-Semitic attacks against vulnerable communities. We can predict where and when attacks against diasporic Jews will occur based on when people are talking about the word apartheid on social media. The signal is carried by social media and into the real world. in ways that give us the capacity to forecast where anti-Semitism will heat up down to the county level. The data shows that there's a correlation between this kind of activity and vulnerability for Jewish communities everywhere, and it doesn't matter which one of those myths are ascendant. They both produce the exact same results. That isn't surprising, because what our data suggests is that they're the same exact myth used by two different forms of populism that use that myth to clutch onto power and to feed red meat, to feed their tropes of populism to their base. So we noted that there was a huge change in when these terms were ascendant. When we found that the right was in power, we found that the threats around the New World Order, the immigration issues, the fact that Jews are replacing people in their homelands, that was the trope that became prominent. But when the left took control, it emboldened elements of the far left, and all of a sudden, we saw a moral allergy appear towards the state of Israel, which predicted attacks against Jews everywhere that happened. So we focus on Twitter because Twitter is really a kind of global public square. Our research shows that when trends emerge on Twitter, it's a lodestar for what's going to be happening all over the rest of social media. Although there's competitors now, we see that Pew Research and others have shown that Twitter has a massively outsized influence both on public perception and on the media. So if we want to understand which way the wind is blowing, publicly and internationally, this is a crucial platform for doing that. So the two tropes you mentioned, we present some pretty grotesque memes here that depict them, and you can really see how the similarities they have. I suppose you can look at these tropes and see that there are conspiracies of Jews that are working together to displace ethnic white populations in Western countries by bringing in immigrants. They're controlling industries, they're controlling the banks, and what they're doing is they are launching what appears to be an effort for ethnic cleansing and genocide. When we look at the apartheid libel and we look at the memes associated with that, we find the exact same memes. Right there, you can see now the Jews are a genocidal operation in Israel with their own nation. The Zionists are controlling world events, not a conspiracy of people. And wouldn't you know it, there's a great replacement happening in Israel, step by step. You can see how identical these are in terms of their mimetic structure, in terms of the memes that they have. But what we find with the activity goes beyond just looking at how similar they are structurally. I'm afraid my clicker is not working again. Oh, here we go. Okay, great. What you're seeing on the left is surges of these New World Order kinds of replacement conspiracies. And look at what happens. At critical moments in the United States, when COVID first arrives, we see a record spike. That record was nothing compared to the day that George Floyd died. And when the election conspiracies began emerging on Fox News in prominent ways, you had a surge in these suspicions. And finally, on January the 6th itself. But notice that after the change of power, when the right loses power, look how quiet that signal gets. While that signal is prominent, this is predicting it's forecasting the real world attacks. It's forecasting the protests. It's forecasting the mobilizations. The populists are using this in order to seed suspicion and seize control. That is what's coming out of the data. Now, when we look at apartheid and we look at the opposite libel, look at what happens here. Oops, sorry, excuse me. Let's go back one slide. There we go. All of a sudden after the election, I suppose now there's a moral allergy to Israel that wasn't there before. That's interesting. We see that human rights organizations begin getting pretty bold. As they're releasing reports, we find bots that are amplifying those reports all over social media. The prominence in the use of these tropes now starts forecasting real-world events. It didn't before. Before, it didn't actually predict attacks against Jews anywhere. It was only after these switches happened that the emboldening occurred, and the trope of apartheid and the libel of apartheid became a campaign slogan for populist elements on the left. And so what we see is that in terms of the pendulum effect, let's take a look at this in ways that kind of give us a summary of the slides. There we go. You can see that under the right-leaning administration, you had a 6x increase of these what are considered traditional anti-Semitic tropes over anti-Zionist tropes. And there's a complete inversion by the time we get to the other side of this, right? When the polarizing pendulum swings the other way, and you have the left assuming power, it immediately switches. Now, we talk about a double standard against Israel. So one of the things that we wanted to do in the course of this research was actually measure just what that standard is. When people are talking about the language of human rights, how often are they talking about Israel? And how often are they talking about other nations? Our analysis suggests that this isn't a double standard, it's a 10x standard. Israel's mentioned on average more than 10 times more than any other nation in the top 10 when it comes to these issues. This isn't a problem for Israel, guys. This is a problem for international human rights. I look at this graph, and I think about the people who are screaming about international rights, international human rights. I need to be honest with you. I suspect they don't really mean it. When we look at the worst perpetrators of human rights abuses, we see that this is even worse. With China, it's mentioned 12 times more than China, with the apartheid they're committing against Uyghurs as we speak. 38 times more than Iran, 50 times more than Russia, 111 times more than North Korea. These are places that actually do have settlers. These are places that really do colonize others. These are places that really do commit apartheid every single day. I wonder how it is they're not receiving ample attention. I wonder where that attention is going. So I'm going to skip this slide because we've already gone through this. Now, what I'm showing you here, I think, is crucial to understand. The signal, these are not the same signals. It looks like I'm showing you the same signals. They are not. At the top, you have the terms colonial, apartheid, settler, the rest of them. And below, you have real-world anti-Semitic incidents occurring in the United States, both on college campuses in red and ADL incidents in blue. When the hashtags for apartheid begin surging on social media, they are 65% correlated with the attacks on campuses across the United States. They're 25% correlated by county with the ADL information. The forecasting signal from these hashtags about social justice are forecasting real-world events. The real-world events are not forecasting the signals, meaning that the chaos is coming from the social cyber domain and into the real world. This appears to have directionality. Even as the libels are surging against Israel, this is creating a condition whereby its advocates are forced into silence as their lives become swamped by attacks due to their rank injustice just by virtue of the fact that they are Jewish. It creates an inability for the diasporic community to feel a filial sense of loyalty and a sense of belonging to the broader Jewish community and specifically to the state of Israel. This creates further conditions that endanger Israel internationally as its advocates are silenced in fear as the attacks against them increase, along with damage to Israel's reputation. I'm sorry, I'm having some difficulty here. Okay, good. Okay, so let me summarize where we are so far, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about national security here in Israel. We performed with the Reuben Foundation what I think is the largest study done on the subject of how anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are related. The spoiler alert is that they're essentially the same thing. We quantified the double standard against Israel to understand just how bad that double standard really is and found that it's actually a 10x standard. This appears to be a crisis for the language of human rights, much less Israel. We find that the anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, these tropes, they don't emerge at the same time. There's turn-taking, there's a division of labor in anti-Semitism. We note that the social media signal is the forecaster. It's the upstream source of this. And finally, we note that the U.S. political power shifts from left to right appear to precipitate a lot of predicting when these things become prominent themselves. So now there's the question of how this impacts the state of Israel and what it is we can actually do about this to manage the problem given these understandings. I would suggest to you that when I see the polarization that is taking place in the United States, in 2020, a set of riots broke out in the United States. Many of you might be familiar. Where those riots occurred was predicted by activity on social media around social justice. Where the attacks from vigilantes occurred in response to that was also predicted by signals from online groups that were talking about this new world order stuff. This means that the polarization pendulum, the fixation that these populist groups have for anti-Semitism on each side, is being used to feed into a conflict between global perspectives on human rights and national perspectives of autonomy. The populists on both sides are using them in a mode, the polarization pendulum fuels reciprocal radicalization. The capacity by which the suspicions and the violence empower the populists on both sides. That may sound familiar to you because that appears to be a process that's happening here in Israel. So what our data suggests, and this is, I think it's worth noting, is that these two forms of populism have a fixation on Jews. So when these kinds of conflicts emerge in Israel, it may be grounds for national security problems, as media that is obsessed with demonizing Israel becomes involved in the conflict. As left-leaning social justice media holds up Jews that they like and demonizes the Jews they hate. Even as right-wing influencers and those on the populist right may bring up the nationalist Jews that they love and demonize the Jews that they hate. This creates a very challenging problem to manage internally. And with no visibility on social media, with no ability to be able to see how this is happening, it can create realities on the ground that the rest of us are simply left to deal with in chaotic ways. So I believe that this research could be essential in understanding the unified interests that the Jewish diasporic community has with Israel itself. These aren't one hatred, two forms of hatred, it's one form of hatred. It betrays the unity in the set of the confluence of interests the diaspora and Israel have together, and suggests that we need to find a way for those who need protections globally and those who have them nationally to reconcile our differences, and to do that on the basis, perhaps, of being Jewish.
This is really an opportunity, I think, as well, to talk about the threats to this type of research. What Joel has been working through here is massive amounts of open source data, open source intelligence. So for everybody here that has a publicly available social media account, largely 80% of social media, that's largely been available to researchers. And there's a bit of a potential shell game going on right now with the CEOs of social media companies. With the launch of ChatGPT, suddenly you have social media company CEOs doing media tours talking about how AI is going to destroy the world. There are real threats from AI to civilization, no doubt. But it's pretty coincidental that 6 months ago, ChatGPT was launched, and launched potentially $1 trillion industry that's based on monetizing open source social media data, publicly available social media data. 80% of the social media data most people and researchers had previously had access to. These social media companies are sealing off brick by brick this open source data. So it is a tremendous threat to the Jewish community based on what Dr. Finkelstein just outlined for you, that this data is becoming increasingly unavailable to research organizations and the public in the national security sector writ large. I also would be remiss not to really thank you, or Lechner, who's here, CEO from Bright Data, who, when he heard that we were here talking about these issues, has partnered with the NCRI and helped provide us with data through a lot of our research that has helped us do some of the work that we do. So I just think it's something else that lawmakers need to be aware of, and be galvanizing other lawmakers from around the world to understand that these issues happening with social media companies sealing off all of the social media data from the research community and the intelligence field is very detrimental to vulnerable communities.
Thank you very much. מכיוון שיש לנו הרבה מאוד דוברים ומכובדים שהגיעו לכבד אותנו, אז אנחנו ניתן קודם כל ליושבי ראש השדולה, מיכל, אחר כך בועז, לאחר מכן השרים ידברו, שאר חברי הכנסת, ולבסוף חברת הכנסת אורנה ברביבאי, יושבת ראש השדולה, תסכם.
ממליץ לך לשלב אנשי מקצוע בין לבין, אחרת זה יהיה מאוד, זה מהלקח שלי מהסבבים הקודמים שלי.
או שחברי הכנסת ידברו קצר, ואז זה גם...
זה גם רעיון.
זה תמיד טוב.
20 שניות.
טוב, כמו בהסתייגויות.
בסוף נגיד כמה דבר.
Thank you very much. Members of Knesset, Roderman Family Foundation, distinguished guests, I'm honored to be the co-chairwoman of the Caucus for Israel-American Relations. American Jewry has always stood strong with Israel. It has been a bedrock of solidarity and has not just embodied but let world Jewry knowing that we all share common faith that creates solidarity stronger than anything. American Jewry has always led the way knowing that Kol Israel Aravim Ze Lazeh. We all know that Israel is the last bastion of safety and security for Jews. It is a place where we all know when we all can come when anti-Semitism and Israel bashing take central stage. But this means that the problems we face here are also the problems for American and world Jewry. We must use this platform to make sure that world Jewry, led by America, takes more active role in what happens here in Israel, not just on matters of aliyah or donations, but on the crucial and fundamental issues that keep Israel Jewish, that keeps Israel free, that keeps Israel democratic. Being a light unto the nations is one thing, but sometimes we must be a light unto ourselves to dispel forces of darkness from within. It is now more crucial than ever that we hear your voices and thoughts, how you see our relationships going forward, and how your involvement in Israel can safeguard it for generations to come. But this solidarity means that the problems that arise here in Israel greatly impact our most basic solidarity. The problem here in Israel is also a problem for Jews in America. It's time to make sure that Jews in America and throughout the world takes more of an active role in what happens here in Israel, not just on matters of aliyah. Oh, sorry. Oh. Not just in matters of aliyah and donations, but on the crucial matter that keeps Israel Jewish and democratic. I read, yes. In 2 weeks, we will commemorate 9th of twice we have lost our homeland on this day. Twice we have lost everything because we allowed wrongdoing within us to lead us to destruction. We must use our relationship and this platform now to work together as one to prevent it from happening a third time. Thank you very much.
תודה רבה, מיכל, וחבר הכנסת בועז.
Good morning. I'm very happy to be here in this caucus. Thank you very much, dear guests, distinguished guests. I won't mention all of you, but I'll be very short, I promise, because I would like to hear you. It's much more important, I think, this morning. Indeed, we live right now in a certain, how would I say, it is a kind of turmoil in Israel right now, and we have to be honest about it. I'm new in politics. I joined the Knesset only in November. Before that, I used to be a journalist and editor-in-chief. And as a journalist, I was very lucky to see and to cover many events around the world, including in America. And I'm telling my American friends, I recall in 2016 in America, you had elections, and Mr. Trump won the elections. And many people, did not like the result. I remember the demonstrations. I was there. I covered them. And then in 2020, there were again elections, and this time Mr. Biden, the actual president, won the elections. And again, I've seen a lot of demonstrations. The other side, did not agree. And they spoke about stealing the elections. Now, as much as I recall, In 2016, the elections weren't cancelled. It's the same in 2020. And then France, just a few weeks ago, there was a reform in France, the pension reform, and people went in the streets. I've seen that, big, huge demonstrations. I didn't see President Macron coming back from his reforms, and I didn't see French becoming an end of democracy as I saw the signs over there. And I also covered the events in England when you had the Brexit for or against, and I remember those for and those against, and they were saying again, the end of the United Kingdom. Moreover, it was the end of Europe, it was the end of civilization nearly, and I saw all that. And what I would like to say is demonstrations are more than not only allowed. I mean, I do not wish, none of us, to live in a country with no demonstrations. We do not wish, I mean, to live in a country which is not democratic. And therefore, I would say, but at the end of because we're democratic, as all the examples I gave before, I mean, elections determined what happened at the end of the day. Now, concerning America and Israel, when I became in 2008 ambassador of my country in an Arabic country called Mauritania, the first thing I did when I went to my embassy is to telephone and to call the American ambassador. That was the first thing I did. And why? Because I wanted to thank him. I wanted to thank him for the friendship, for not only sharing the common values, common interests, but common history also. And I always want to remind people, I mean, that when on the 14th of May, when David Ben-Gurion declared Israel as an independent state, I mean, don't forget that he took Truman. And there were debates in America. Don't forget Marshall was against, you know, all these debates on the 12th, etc., 12th of May. It took Mr. Truman, President Truman, exactly 11 minutes to recognize. And I do not believe, and I do not think that nothing can make us, how would I say, interfere in this amazing relationship we have. We can, of course, disagree from time to time, but it must not affect, of course, the American Jews. And last thing I would like to say concerning anti-Semitism, because that's what we talk about, don't forget, I mean, this amazing speech, and I mention it again, this amazing speech of Shylock in The Merchant of Venice. I mean, if you prick us, won't I bleed? And unfortunately, sir, anti-Semitism exists, and will always exist. And on the contrary, in a changing world like we have today, and we have to read the word of yesterday of Stefan Zweig, you must understand how much this strength, this basics, which is the relationship between America and Israel, is so important also to fight against this evil thing, which is called anti-Semitism. Thank you very much.
I'll take the opportunity, and I'm really to honor you, Jay, that your Hebrew is not that good as your Shiraz. And the facts are the same in Hebrew, English, never mind. It's we speak about three kind of Semitism, or Zionists. We have the Zionist people, which, to be honest, are very few in the world. We have in Israel about 2/3, and we have all over, mainly in the US, the same number almost. And then we have non-Zionists. We have here in Israel about 10%, and we have in the US amongst the Jewish people, and we have anti-Zionists, and that's the majority in many other countries, including Israel. And the anti-Zionists now, in our time here in the Middle East, it's something that we have to ask ourselves what's going to happen in the future, in the near future. Because I may say that in this area, in the Middle East, in the large Middle East, begins in Iran and goes west to Iraq, to Morocco, and Turkey in the north down to Yemen in the south. That's the large Middle East. 600 million people, 600 million Muslims, amongst them 450 million Arabs. And just 2 months ago, something very significant happened. As we all remember, in Syria, Bashar al-Assad, or as the Arabs called him, the butcher, Jazzar in Arabic, he's in charge of murdering more than 600,000 Muslims, Sunnis in Syria. He was banned by all Arab Muslim countries. He was banned here in Israel by the Muslims. But 2 months ago, it's about 11 years after the Arab Spring, so-called, began in Syria, and after banning him for more than a decade, 2 months ago, the Arab League, 22 Arab countries, brought him back. And Syria in general, and Bashar al-Assad in particular, is back into and was hacked by the 22 Arab countries, 450 million people. On the other side, Iran is using a very weakness showed by the US in the Middle East over the last few years. Left Afghanistan, left Syria, almost left Iraq, ignored a direct attack by Iran from Iranian soil towards the Saudi Arabia's Aramco sites just 4 years ago. So we can see that every week, almost every day, we are waking up with another Arab country who is renewing its diplomatic ties with Iran. Just yesterday or this morning we read about Egypt. So when we are talking about the US and Israel relations, Israel is playing a much more significant role in this region than used to be before. And we are not the 51st star in the US flag, but we are definitely the most significant ally that the US has in this region, and we are strengthening our role, not because we wanted to strengthen it, but that's what happened due to what I've just said. So the goal of strengthening the relations between the American peoples and Israel, and between the United States and Israel in general, and between the Americans and the Jewish people in both, in Israel and in the US. But mainly, of course, with the Jewish people here in Israel. Because, as I said before, amongst the three styles of Zionism, in Israel, Zionists are only Jewish people. I don't know about 22% of the Arab citizens in Israel. I don't know amongst them people who define themselves openly as Zionists. We have some, but they won't do it in an open way. So that's something that we have to make sure that over the coming years and the next very few years, we might see changes in our region. Countries are crashing, like Lebanon, like Syria, like Iraq, and other countries are rebuilding themselves. But they rebuild themselves, trying to rebuild themselves on the Israeli account. We have to make sure that the role that we are playing here in this Middle East, representing the West, representing the interests of the West, and I don't see in this region a better representative of the West in general, and the US in particular, a better representative than the State of Israel. Thank you very much.
תודה רבה. שירה רודרמן, בבקשה.
So I want to take us back maybe to the research and the finding and use this opportunity to hear some thoughts here. I think that what we saw here, as you pointed out, anti-Semitism existed many years ago and probably would not be solved by any policy or decision. However, the change, taking the classic anti-Semitism and now using it in forms of anti-Zionism, which is clearly against the State of Israel, is something that is a common entity for us as Jews around the world. And in our view, Israel has the responsibility to lead the conversation, to show the world and start acting on the fact that the social media, which predict, as we heard, okay, behavior in the street, has the power, because they hold us for two standards further from any other country. We need to think about how to use it to our benefit. We need to think how we are using our smart abilities to change the narrative in the social media, to start making an impact. Our kids in Israel and in the world spending time on social media. They're not spending time here listening to us. Our generation that needs to fight, if in campuses or in the army, have to deal with this, and excuse me for my language, the most complicated crap that they have to face. Half of it is not even real. So we don't have time to spend. We really need to think what we can do as Jews, as Israel, and where we come together to fight, to make a change, to create policies, to create narratives, to maybe think outside of the box. I will give an idea and say maybe the state of Israel can call, literally call and invite for a special conversation the heads of Twitter, the heads of other platforms, and show them where they put Israel in what, not in defensive or apologetic, but try to handle it. I do know, and I'm aware that there are ways that we sometimes say, let's ignore, because to give power, but it's taken over. The numbers are big. Our kids are lost. We need help, and we need to help them. And the last thing I would say, I do think most of us are aware, Avi, you spoke about many people in Israel, but there are many Jews in the world are not comfortable to say they're Zionists.
Yeah.
They take it off, their organizations, their identity, their synagogues, because of this discomfort. You pay a price to say you're a Zionist. Now, if you are in Israel and you're Zionist, it's one thing, because you're in your country, and, people don't like it, but you're home. If you work in Google, or you work in the cafe and you're Zionist, or you're a student in the campus and you're Zionist, and it means that someone's going to beat you up or not take you to a job, what does it mean? It's better to shut your mouth and be quiet. So we, as much as we have tremendous issues to deal with, and yes, we're not going to solve it today and maybe tomorrow, the opportunity here is to surface it, to bring it to all of you, to make it relevant in security element, education, diaspora, the minister is here, and take this data and let's use it for our benefit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ruderman and Chaver Knesset Dani Luz.
I'll speak very shortly because, as Amichai said, the floor should be open to the people coming. First of all, thank you Shira and Jay, for everything that you do for the Jewish people and in general for humanity. I know that you also do a lot for inclusion of people with disabilities and also everything that you do for America-Israel relationships. It's very felt. I followed you before I was an MK. I'm originally from Montreal, Canada. I've been involved in politics since I made Aliyah. And I've been involved in diaspora relations also, and I know that your voice is incredibly important and that the investment that you put in that is very felt in this field. So thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for all the other organizations and partners that are here. I just want to say something very short. It actually builds up on exactly what you said. The issue of anti-Semitism is definitely very important and unfortunately felt more and more in the last few years. We see that in statistics. We see that in different research, such as the one that you just showed, that it's becoming, unfortunately, a bigger problem. I think there's also another side to the coin, not in order to minimize the importance of our fight against anti-Semitism, but I think it's the other side of the same coin, and it's to make clear to American Jews and to Jews all around diaspora, but we're talking right now about American Jews, that they are full partners in what we're building here in Israel, that this is their home as much as our home. I'm not only saying that in the sense that it's an open door if they want to make Aliyah. That's not the only way for them to be involved. It's their project. It's the common project of the Jewish people. And it's a project that we can be very proud of. There's so many things that we can be proud of when we look at the state of Israel, what we've achieved in the last 75 years, the very vibrant democracy that we've built here, the economic powerhouse that we've built here, the incredible country that we've built here that we can be very proud of. And I think that one of the things that will help fight that fear of saying that you're Zionist because of anti-Semitism is the other side of the coin. And when you're very proud
Yes.
of everything that Israel has achieved, and you can then wear proudly that tag that says, I am a Zionist. And I think that this is something that I know that you've seen a little bit of political action of what happens in Israel in this room, but that's something that opposition and coalition agrees on. The relationship with American Jewry is incredibly important to all Israelis. And so thank you for everyone who is leading this caucus. And I'm going to just end here
Thank you
because I
very
promise
much.
to be short.
Thank you very much.
I'm also leaving. Not because of me. No.
קרול נוריאל, הליגה נגד השמצה. Whatever you want.
Good morning. And first of all, allow me just to thank personally Shira and Jay Ruderman for their, first of all, as ADL, their incredible partnership in working together on the issue of anti-Semitism, but not only on other issues as well. Toda rabah. Your contribution is so appreciated. Then, member of Knesset Iluz, who I think just left us. Yes. I just wanted to thank member of Knesset Iluz for his important voice on the inclusion and the importance of American Jewry in this this project that we are building here. And these days, needless to say, how issues that are related to Israel are creating so much concern within American Jewry. At the risk of reiterating some points that you already mentioned, Dr. Finkelstein, I want to mention a couple of data points from an ADL perspective. First of all, I don't know if you mentioned that in the beginning or not, but let me just say that in 2022, ADL documented a rise of 36% in anti-Semitic incidents, which is the second consecutive year of unprecedented rise in anti-Semitic incidents in the US, which is huge. We're talking about an average of 10 anti-Semitic incidents a day. And I share others' views in this room that anti-Zionism today is anti-Semitism because the negation, the rejection of Jews was replaced with the negation and rejection of the Jewish state. So it's important to say that. In a poll that we've done we've published, in January, we found that conspiracy theories, exactly as you said, and Israel-focused anti-Semitism overlap significantly, meaning that anti-Israel sentiments and anti-Semitism really correlates more than it did before. And anecdotally, I want to mention that 18% of those who are polled said that they feel uncomfortable spending time with somebody who supports Israel.
Yeah.
That says a lot, and that's very dangerous. And one thing that I want to mention in that respect, and Shira, this is to your point, is that young adults have more anti-Israel sentiments than older generations, and this is something that we need to take care of. Another survey that we've done about how social and media exposure predict anti-Semitic beliefs found that Americans most often hear anti-Semitic comments from politicians, TV, or social media, and these are places that we need to take care of. And finally, I want to say something about what do we need to do for it, because how do we make Jews and Jewish communities safe, secure, but not only that, not only safe and secure, but also confident in their Jewish identity? We polled students in universities. Did you know that 15% of Jewish students hide their Jewish identity? They're not open about being Jewish. This is so dangerous. And to me,
How many?
that should be
How many?
15.
15?
15.
If I remember correctly, in the last report you had, the IDL was 45%.
No, 15% on campus hide their Jewish identity. 12% do not feel comfortable joining Jewish groups or unions on campus. So
מה
that
המקור
says
של הנתונים? זה שלכם?
שלנו. So that says a lot, and I think that this is an important, as much as social media is a focus, campuses should also be a focus. Thank you very much.
תודה רבה.